Welcome to the recorded version of the Grantmakers and Aging web seminar, Making Communities Age-Friendly, the WHO Age-Friendly Environments Program, featuring John Beard, Director of the Department of Aging and Life Course with the World Health Organization, and John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers and Aging, from December 10, 2012. This event was made possible by a partnership between Grantmakers and Aging and the John A. Hartford Foundation. Technical and production support is provided by the American Society on Aging.
Welcome to Conversations with GIA. This is John Feather, the CEO of Grantmakers and Aging, and I want to welcome you to this special webinar in our continuing series on important topics of interest to funders in aging. Today's session is entitled Making Communities Age-Friendly, the WHO Age-Friendly Environments Program. I'm happy that so many of you are joining us today for this timely discussion. Before we begin, I want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation of New York for their continuing support in making today's webinar available free of charge to funders in aging. We also want to thank the expert team at the American Society on Aging for providing technical and production support for the series. Making cities and communities age-friendly is one of the most effective local policy approaches for responding to demographics of aging. The physical and social environments are key determinants of whether people can remain healthy, independent, and autonomous long into their old age. Older persons play a critical role in their communities. They engage in paid and volunteer work, transmit experience and knowledge, and help their families with caring responsibilities. These contributions can only be ensured if they enjoy good health and if societies address their needs. To help us understand these issues both here in the U.S. and internationally, we are honored to have Dr. John Beard, who is the Director of the Department of Aging and Life Course with the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. He works with the global community to meet the challenges and to maximize the benefits associated with the rapid aging of their populations. He is the chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Aging and a member of the advisory board of the World Demographic and Aging Forum. John is an Australian physician and has held a range of senior public policy and academic roles in both the U.S. and Australia, and has published widely in the international literature and remains actively involved in several large international research studies. Welcome, John.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't we get started with some history of the United Nations and WHO's role in aging. Has there always been an aging program at WHO?
There's been a program at our headquarters because we have several layers of the organization for almost 20 years. But it was only about four or 5 years ago that it was upgraded to the level it is now, which is on a par with all the other major initiatives that WHO pursues. And in fact, in our current planning for the next 5 years, it's been identified as a priority issue.
Tell us a little bit about how what the scope of work for the operation is at this point.
Okay, well, one of the challenges for us is diversity. One of the hallmarks of aging is that as we get older, as individuals, we become more diverse. Some 80-year-olds can be extremely fit and active, and other 80-year-olds can be in very poor health and require a lot of support. But for WHO, not only do we have that individual level of diversity, we also have diversity across the globe because on the one hand, I talked to you here in the US. A moment ago, I was talking to somebody from Kenya, and next week I go to China. And all of those environments have different implications for older people. So it's a challenge, but we say that with the world as a whole rapidly aging, and it's not just the rich world, which people often think is where, in fact, the fastest aging is occurring in low and middle income countries. With that rapid transition, that unless we take it seriously, there'll be a lot of challenges confronting the governments around the world. But on the other hand, if they take early action, then this transition to older populations is a wonderful opportunity for them. And we want to help them seize that opportunity and, as you said at the introduction, make the most of all the contributions that older people can make to society.
Given that diversity and the challenge of addressing a worldwide audience, what are the major goals of the Department of Aging and Life Course?
Okay, well, first of all, we want to really have health at the center of the debate. At the moment, if you open a newspaper, you would think that the aging is a problem and it's all about economics and it's sending countries broke. But if we're trying to maximize the contribution of older people, we need to keep them healthy. And so we say there's 4 things which we need to do to achieve that. The first is not to wait until people are old. In fact, that good health in older age starts a long time before that with the behaviours which we can follow through life. Things like not smoking, being physically active, eating a healthy diet. So these are things that the organisation is obviously pursuing very strongly. Once though people get to older age, they need access to basic health care. And in many parts of the world, that's just not true. So people need to have particularly chronic diseases diagnosed early. They need to have things like high blood pressure identified so that chronic disease can be prevented. So we need to make this primary care accessible to everybody. But then we also need to remember that no matter how hard we work at prevention and how well we manage primary care, there will still be a time in many people's lives where they actually their physical or their mental function deteriorates to a point where they can no longer live independently, and so they need support. And also we need to ensure that everybody can die with dignity. So that's the second stream of what we're trying to do, is focus on primary health care through to long-term care and palliative care. The third stream is what we're going to talk about today, and that is creating environments that allow older people to contribute and to participate, age-friendly environments, and so we will talk about that in a minute. But the final focus of our action is on reinventing aging, rethinking what it means to be old. Many of us carry stereotypes of aging in our minds which come from maybe the middle of the 20th century, and we have to realize that times have changed, that there's many more older people than there used to be. Many of them have ambitions way beyond what they used to have. The environment they live in is very different, so things like IT and other opportunities arise which weren't present then. And also we had this stereotype in the 20th century that older people at around the age of 60 retired and basically were marginalised from society. They would continue to participate in their family, but otherwise they almost disappeared. And many older people today are saying that's just not good enough. That's not the way we want to live the last 20 or 30 years of our lives.
As you say, we're going to be talking pretty much for the rest of the time about the Age-Friendly Environments program, but I did want to make sure, because sometimes this confuses our audiences and folks here in the U.S. particularly, I think, about what is the relationship between the WHO and the United Nations in general and the specific local governments with which you work. How does that structure all fit together?
Okay, well, we're the health arm of the United Nations. It's a little bit different than that because, in fact, we predated the United Nations, and in fact, our PAHO office predated WHO. So we are essentially a subsidiary of the UN. Our relationship with municipalities is unusual. Generally, we relate directly to the Federal Health Department of a country, of one of our what we call member states. But with initiatives like the Age-Friendly Cities and Communities program and with initiatives like our Healthy Cities work, we actually relate directly to municipalities. It's not in the same, I guess, legal sense, but we engage with them in a partnership sense and a networking, attempting to try and connect cities from around the world and to the latest information that's available on the particular area which we're talking to them about.
Well, let's turn then to that relationship and the programs that have been developed by WHO and your office. Tell us a little bit about the general structure and philosophy of the WHO Age-Friendly Environments Program. Okay, well, the idea is that regardless of your level of physical functioning, where you live makes a difference. If you're a typical, let's say, 65 or 70-year-old in a Western country with a little bit of arthritis and some physical deterioration, it makes a difference whether you have access to an elevator or whether there's stairs that you have to climb. If you have to climb up a myriad of stairs, you may avoid that building. As people get older, still issues like needing access to toilets or having somewhere to rest when you're walking out on the streets become important. And all of those things, that environment we live in, actually influences our capacity to participate in society. And one of the goals which we have is when we talk about health and aging, we're always thinking about participation at the same time. So we call it active and healthy aging. And so the Age-Friendly Environments Program is about trying to ensure that participation really regardless of people's the level of health they have. Tell us a little bit about how the word environments relates to some of the older programs, I guess, that have been involved with the cities. Is it a city-specific program, or is it broader than that? It started as age-friendly cities, I think, because it grabbed people's imagination. I think my predecessor says he was on the beach in Rio de Janeiro one day, and he was doing an interview, and he mentioned this idea of an age-friendly city, and then suddenly people became interested. And our program started by bringing people from around 30 cities from around the world together to talk about, well, if you were to create an age-friendly city, what might it look like? And they went through and identified 8 different domains, some of them physical, some of them more social. And in each of those domains, they tried to flesh out the specifics that might make a city a more age-friendly place. But as we've kept talking about it, and as the incredible momentum of enthusiasm around the world has built, many other communities have also become interested. And so, for example, in Canada, in Quebec and in broader Canada, we have over 500 very small rural communities, many of them quite isolated, and they're also wanting to become more age-friendly places. If you take the notion a step further, there's no reason why you can't have an age-friendly hospital or an age-friendly university where older people have access to lifelong learning, or even an age-friendly bank. And there's all sorts of different nuances in each of those different environments which can make it a more age-friendly place. So we talk about our Age-Friendly Environments Program. It started as Age-Friendly Cities. We've expanded to incorporate smaller communities. We haven't done much work on the others, but certainly in terms of my work with the World Economic Forum, the group that I'm working with is currently looking at how you can create age-friendly businesses. So I think it's a moniker that covers a range of different environments, but most of our work has been around cities and communities at the municipal level, essentially. One of the probably most influential and best-known documents is really the initial document that led to some of that came out of the initial discussion with the 33 cities that signed on as the age-friendly cities. And that document's called Global Age-Friendly Cities, a Guide. And as you say, it identifies 8 different areas of interest. Could you go through those with us and talk a little bit about how that was set up and why you think that comprehensive set is an important way to frame the arguments here? Well, I think it's a useful frame, but in fact, I think there's other issues which may have been covered, but only in passing in that initial document, which we're trying to encourage a little bit more.
So it's a good place to start, but we don't try, we're not very rigid these days in our interpretation. We try and leave it up to cities to try and work with their local populations to identify what are the key issues for them. But if you look at the 8 domains we identified, some of them are about the physical environment. So if you look at if you think of, and I will talk about cities just for simplicity, but if we look at a city centre, are there park benches for people to rest on? Is it a safe environment? Is there good lighting? Are you still there, John?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, my computer just went blank on me.
Yes, we're all still here.
Okay, so I'll just go back to that. Sorry, everybody. So are those physical things there that make it a pleasant place, like is there greenery? And so is it the sort of environment an older person would want to go out in? The next is, are there places for them to go? So one of the things we've been looking at is, and we've found in looking at how the neighbourhood can influence the health of older people, is one of the things that influences whether they get out or not is, are there shops in their local neighbourhood? Something that is very obvious, but unless you think about it, you don't necessarily think about it in relation to older people. And there may also be cultural things for them to do. So there may be museums, or and if there are museums, are they expensive or are they free for older people to go to? Do they have special sessions for older people? And are they physically accessible? So again, coming back to the idea of elevators rather than stairs. Another way of thinking about how you might get somewhere is to think about transport. So are there disabled access buses? And again, are they affordable? Are there seats on the buses that are priority for older people? And are the bus drivers trained to ensure that there's a level of respect is shown to those older people as they enter onto the bus? So that's all about the physical environment outside the home, but we also need to think about inside the home. Do people have access to appropriate housing? I know I used to live in New York for a while, and I know because of the incentives in terms of rent limitations, often older people are left in an apartment which they can't leave, even though it's no longer appropriate for them, because to leave they will no longer have the rent limits which have been in place on their apartment for many years, and it will become unaffordable to move into an apartment that's more appropriate. So how can we change those sorts of issues and ensure that people have access to elevators and the sorts of things which housing can offer to older people? So they're the physical things. But then living in a city is also about connectivity. It's about how you remain engaged with the people around you. How do you keep in touch with your family? How do you keep in touch with your neighbours? And what are the things that you can do that will facilitate that? And then how, if you're part of the community, how can you actually have a say in the issues which will influence you? How can you say to government, hang on, that's not what's appropriate for us, we need this? So an age-friendly city has mechanisms which allow that sort of contribution of older people. And then, of course, there's all the issues around is there access to healthcare and community support and those sorts of things, which are normally the immediate things people think about when you talk about aging, but we put them, they're in there, but they're certainly only a minor part of all this broader scheme of strategies that a city or community can put in place to be more age-friendly.
Well, one of the aspects as you talk about the last set of issues that was particularly interesting, I think, for those who are used to thinking about, age-friendly cities as transportation and housing, basically, is this whole area of respect and social inclusion. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the kinds of things that you're seeing around the world to enhance that activity?
Okay, well, a key thing here is the idea of intergenerational connectivity. How do we ensure that older people aren't marginalised, aren't thought of as differently, but on the other hand, that they're given the respect that they actually deserve. And this can be quite challenging. I was in Slovenia, and we were talking with a group of older people about the issues that very similar to what I've just been saying to you. And they said, "Oh yes, well we've got these buses with disabled access, but the moment we get on the bus driver just tears off, and it's impossible for us to stand up, and nobody gives their seat." So how do you change that culture so the bus driver, to start off with, pays more respect to the older person as they get on, but also the people sitting in the disabled access chairs get up and give the seat to the older people. A lot of it is about changing attitudes. We started this year. We had every year on April the 7th we have a day called World Health Day, which is the birthday of WHO, and each year we try and identify an emerging theme which we think has been examined in the global community. And this year we chose aging. And what we tried to do was create a whole series of images of aging that conflicted with the stereotypes that people held. So one of them I love is we have an image of the world's oldest bungee jumper, Helmut Wirtz, who's flying through the air in utter peace, doing something that I would be totally terrified about, and who, in fact, is no longer the world's oldest bungee jumper because a 96-year-old took his record. But it's an image that really clashes with the stereotypes that people hold about older people, and we've been trying to do that throughout the year. There are also a number of websites, like we've created a website called agefriendlyworld.org, and on there we're trying to increase the discourse about aging so that it's in ways that aren't the sort of norm that you experience in the paper when you read it in the morning. And of course, we talk a lot with the media to try and get them to try and treat older people in a different way when they write their articles or do their programs.
Let's pursue that a little bit more in terms of how you work to get the message out, because obviously you cannot tell countries or cities or communities how they're to run these programs. What do you see as the special role that WHO and your office has to play in reaching out across communities? And in some ways, how can we be helpful to you?
Okay, let me, we don't look at a top-down WHO-driven model. We look at ourselves as catalysts. And what we're trying to do here, so we've created this thing that we call the WHO Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities. And what we're trying to do there is connect cities and communities around the world to share their experiences, also to expose them to new ideas. We have periodic conferences, and we bring in people who they normally wouldn't talk to about aging to try and stimulate new thinking. And through that connectivity, what we're hoping is they will learn from each other's experiences, and some of those are really quite innovative. When you have as many participating communities as we have, it's quite amazing the ideas that people come up with. But normally that occurs in isolation, and there's no benefit to any other place. But through the network, it allows people to learn about those things and to try and normally to do variations on them themselves. It's amazing that also that it doesn't matter how big your community, the lessons can still be valid. So, for example, in New York, which was the first official member of our network, Michael Bloomberg tells the story that they were what they had to do was think differently. Obviously, you can spend a lot of money doing these things, but you can also do a lot without spending any money. And one of the things they identified was they pay for school buses the whole day, and yet the school buses pick children up in the morning, and then they drop them off at school. Then they do that again in the afternoon, and for the rest of the day they're sitting idle. So what the city decided was, well, why don't we use those buses for another purpose, namely taking taking older people to the places they need to get to. Now, I was telling that story to a remote community in Western Australia, and they said, but we do that too. Our school buses, we use them. We can't afford to have a swimming pool in our community, but the neighbouring community does. So 2 days a week, we get the school bus to pick up older people and take them to the swimming pool where they can do exercises and water aerobics. So, which really brought home to me just how much we have to learn from each other, big and small.
How do you see the network actually helping in that regard? Can any city be or community be a part of the network? How would they go about doing that if they were interested? And can they access the information if they're not part of the network?
Yes, they can certainly access the information. It's all on our website. We would hope it would inspire them to join the network. At the moment, we have, I think it's 9 national or regional programs which are affiliated. And so, for example, in Canada and in Spain, Portugal, France, Slovenia, and Bashkortostan, amongst others, cities and communities can participate through their national or regional programs. And I'm very pleased to see some of the same approach evolving in the US. But cities can also join directly. Now, to join though, we never say that a city is age friendly. So being a member of the network is not to say that you've achieved a level of attainment. What you have to do to join is to make the commitment to become more age friendly. And so the first step is we expect a letter from the mayor or formally from the municipality, which commits to 4 steps. The first one is involving older people. The second is somehow coming to assess their current level of age friendliness. The third is to come up with a plan to become more age friendly. And the final step is to identify some indicators so that they can monitor their progress against that. And they have a couple of years to deliver on that commitment. So at the end of those 2 years, we expect from them a plan of action. And then if they can continue to demonstrate progress against that plan, they can stay part of the network for another 3 years. And then we expect them to reassess the plan and probably come up with a new addition, and that's the way that they can continue to participate.
So if individuals want to know about the program as well as municipalities and other communities are interested in trying to get their own communities to work on this, where would they go for information? Is there a website that's publicly accessible to them?
Yeah, there's a couple of places they can go. The first is the WHO website, which is just who.int. That's for international. And if they go there and they look at programs, they can drop down and find aging, and in there they'll dig around and they can find something. But we've also created another mechanism which is called agefriendlyworld.org. It's still in development, but I think it's an interesting site. It doesn't just show the Age-Friendly Cities and Communities program, although there's, again, a tab in there that people can go to. It's meant to be, we tried to be funky and call it an e-portal because it's meant to be a door to anything you'd want to know on aging. But also beyond what you'd want to know, there's also meant to be it's meant to be a vehicle for discussion. So you'll see there's discussion threads and blogs and all sorts of groovy things like that, which I had to learn about. So, it's still in development, but I think it's a useful point for people to go as well.
And one more time, the web link is
agefriendlyworld.org.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about what you see in the next 5 years in this development. You're talking about that a number of communities have joined. What do you see in terms of how the whole world can learn from each other? What are you finding in other countries that might be particularly applicable here or vice versa?
Okay, so, well, first of all, there has been such an incredible response to this. It's been very difficult for us to keep up. We only launched this 2.5 years ago, and already we have, as I said, 9 regional programs, probably with getting close to 1,000 cities and communities participating, and 100 directly relating to us. We have recently reached an agreement with the EU in Europe to try and set up a regional program there, and they've given a significant amount of money to support that. We're planning to have a second global conference on age-friendly cities and communities towards the end of next year or in spring the year after, and there's a number of other initiatives that are happening globally. But I have to say this has been done on, I don't know if this makes sense in American, but in Australian we say on the smell of an oily rag. That means it's been done with very limited resources. And we've been supported to this point by Atlantic Philanthropies, but for those of you who know Atlantic, you'll know that they're winding down. And so it's going to be challenging for us to maintain that, let alone grow. And we want to grow, and the main reason is that most of the work that's happened so far has been in the rich world. Most of the member cities are in Europe or North America. It's starting to change. We recently had Tehran join, and on October the 1st this year we had 2 cities. One was Washington, D.C., and the other was Kolkata in India. So you can see that we're starting to get major cities outside the rich world also participating. But since that's where most older people live and where the fastest population aging is, and also since it's probably where the worst environments for older people are, we really want to be able to spread our wings and start to involve them. In terms of learning from other communities, there's innumerable individual examples, but I think the sense that I get is once this starts, it gets a momentum of its own. People really seem to get the idea. I was amazed in New York at just how widespread and ingrained in the culture of the New York City government that age friendliness now is. And so when a park is doing something, they start that not only thinking about aging in relation to that park, but they have also started to think outside the normal silos and think about, well, how do old people get to this park? You know, what transportation do they use, and how can we make that easier? The junction between the two. I also look at places like Manchester, where they've developed a program called Valuing Older People, and it creates a whole series of opportunities for older people to learn and to remain engaged. And to really feel that they're a central part of the community, and then you can go to very small places in remote parts of Canada where there's issues in terms of transportation that they're having to grapple with. About if you're an older person and you live on a farm, how do you get access to these things? And in some cases there's electronic solutions, but there's also questions of how. Often it's about how you foster a sense of neighbourhood and community and help other people help them. And often there's people out there who are very willing to provide some support and help, but they just were never aware of how to provide that, how to donate it.
Well, let's talk about that issue for a moment, because, of course, this started as age-friendly cities, but as you say, there are many communities where the population is more isolated, either in rural areas or even what the federal government here in the U.S. calls frontier areas, where there's even sparser populations. And one of the questions is, how transferable are some of the things that we're learning in the city to those areas? And what are you seeing, for example, in the Canadian examples of rural communities? What are they doing that is both similar and different from what we're seeing in the cities?
Okay, overlaid on all of that is also the fact that often rural communities are poor. So you have a mixture of geographic isolation, poverty, And in many places, such as, for example, the north of Canada, you have climatic issues in terms of extreme cold in winter. And in places like Australia, you have extreme heat. And the challenge is quite significant. In terms of the solutions, actually, I'm embarrassed to say that we recently had we co-sponsored a conference with the Public Health Agency of Canada on rural and remote communities and making them more age-friendly. And unfortunately, I couldn't attend. I was in another conference in South Africa at the time. I would love to be able to give you the highlights, but I can't. But we will be putting them on our web and making them available to everybody. So keep watching the space.
Great, because I think this is an area where there is a great deal of interest, and one of the things I think we all see is that there is, in fact, I mean, if you look at just the imagery for some of the age-friendly communities stuff, it's all basically predicated on the notion that everyone is walking to wherever they're going to go, and that, you know, that's the way that we can make these more connected. So I think there is a strong need to reach out in these communities. Let me ask you.
I think, John, sorry, just one of the ways, and it's a lesson that comes from a very urban community, but I think is also applicable in these places, is at least knowing where older people are. And this is an issue which has become more important as we look at disasters and disaster relief. But it arose out of the heat waves in Paris in about almost 10 years ago, when thousands of older people died. And the reason was all their families had gone down to the south coast for summer and left them in the apartment. Nobody knew that they were living alone, and nobody provided any support or knocked on the door just to say, are you okay? Now, I think in all these places, and particularly in rural and remote areas, knowing at least where all the older people in the community are can be a useful way of staying in touch. And in many cases, it's just a telephone call to make sure that everything's still okay. Fostering that sense, that social sense of community and that the older person is still a part of them. They're not somebody who's disappeared and you hear about 10 years later that they died, living alone in their home. They're actually still an active part of the community. I think in many rural places, there is enough sense of community to be able to engage that. And people will go out of their way to pick an older person up and make sure that they can attend some sort of activity, a group activity, and even finding ways where younger older people can provide support for old people. Older people who may have retired but are still young and healthy. They are often very prepared to provide that sort of support because they know one day they themselves might need it.
Let's follow up on that and talk a little bit about something you touched on before, which is older persons as a resource as well as a potential drain on the economy, as is often portrayed. What kind of examples are you seeing around the world around imaginative ways that people are incorporating older people in service to their community? Okay.
Wow, there's so many. I will start. I was recently in Myanmar, the place that used to be called Burma, in a remote community on the Irrawaddy Delta. And what they had created there was what they call an older person self-help group. They bring together the older people in the community, and it's along the same principle that there are younger, active, healthy older people, and then there are some who require more support. But they bring them all together and they try to skill them up to a level where they can engage better, where there are principles in terms of how they can keep that contact, and also where the younger people can provide the support the older people need. So there was an older person there who'd had a stroke. And I said, how in a community like this do you manage stroke? This was a place where there's no electricity, no running water. It was well water. People used pit toilets. How on earth does that person receive the care they need? And they said through the self-help group could identify that this older person had a problem. They had been trained to the point where they knew how to access a health worker who arrived after a couple of days, explained what was going on, and then said, and this is what you need to do to help this person get back function in their leg. And so essentially this person in a remote and poor community was receiving rehabilitation for free from the other community older people who'd been trained to a level where they could provide that. I was just totally inspired by that. On the other hand, in the rich world, I think one of the really exciting things is the whole field of lifelong learning. I was recently at a meeting and I was talking with somebody that you may have seen on the internet. There are now these university units that people can do for free. They don't actually get a qualification for doing it, but it's essentially a very high standard university unit. And they have now been delivering that to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And they have an incredible now knowledge of the way we learn. And I'd always thought that as you get older, in fact, it becomes harder to learn. Certainly, I'm trying to learn French here living in Switzerland, and it's almost impossible for me. But in fact, apparently, for languages, that is true. It is harder to learn a language when you're older. But for other things, it's not. And in fact, it may be that through the experience with these internet units that people are now learning about better ways for older people to learn the things that they need to learn and the ways that they prefer to learn it. So what that then does is provide the opportunity for older people to retain their skills. One of the things we confront is that at the moment, because people expect people to retire at around 60, 62, the moment they get into their 50s, employers become reluctant to continue professional development opportunities for them. Why would I pay to train them when they're just going to retire? Well, the fact is, most older people in the US don't want to retire at traditional retirement ages, and they actually have a right to have access to the training that stops them becoming irrelevant. Because if you don't receive training these days, it's very quickly that your skills diminish to a point where you're no longer employable. And so what I think we're seeing is a complete change in the opportunities that might be available for older people to continue that learning and that training well into older age. And that will help them remain relevant and help them, if they want to stay in the workforce, to stay in the workforce. But it might also help them to do things they'd always wished they could do but never had the opportunity.
Thanks for those inspiring examples. We want to turn to some questions from our audience now, and I will be reading these to you. They've been shared by our audience members. And this one is, the first two are fairly complex, and so let me just read through it as best I can. The discussion about creating more livable communities for older adults often evolves towards discussion about the overall quality of the environment. Advocates for kid-friendly communities, child-friendly communities, and the disability community advocates can feel shut off if the entire focus is on aging. Even within the field of aging, there are generational differences, different perspectives and priorities among baby boomers, those who are 60 and 50s, and the oldest old. I know the arguments about the positive residual effects of age-friendly environments, but that doesn't carry a lot of weight with other advocates who want to be fully engaged in the process and discussion and can as well be powerful advocates. So the question is this: without diluting the effort, how do we build bridges across generations and circumstances and still meet the goal of creating better age-friendly communities?
Okay, well, in English, that we have an innate advantage. Because I'll go back to Michael Bloomberg. Another thing he said when New York joined the network of age-friendly cities was, an age-friendly city is a city for all ages. And certainly this is not about creating a single focus on the needs of older people, but it's, I think, using older people as an entry point to create a better and more sustainable environment. So older people, in a sense, are the canary in the gold mine. Older people can be more vulnerable. They can be more vulnerable to unsafe places, for poor lighting, things like that. They may also be disabled. So there's all the things, as your questioner rightly says, around disability. It's all part of the same issue. And I have to say that here at WHO we work extremely closely with our disability group, and in fact we're also trying to reframe the way we think about aging and moving away from chronological age to thinking more about function as being the key issue. And obviously issues for children, if we're looking at how you can strengthen intergenerational links, they're central as well. So we are not territorial about this. It's not about you have to put aging before all these other issues. But what we're saying is, come on, for the last 30 years, people haven't even thought about older people at all. And yet, if you do think about older people, all of those things that your questioner has raised all become evident. And so I think as an entry point, but not as an end point, it's pretty good.
That's extremely important. I think we find the same in terms of our discussion with funders as well, that most are more interested in making a community better in general rather than specific programs for older people. The next question is also a slightly long one, and I'll try to go through this. Are there tools available to provide support for teams of developers to actually create more housing for older persons? And the person is talking about particularly, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the engagement model in Los Angeles, but it's basically looking at how to provide particularly a focus on the arts within senior housing, so that there's a broader array of services besides the traditional health and social service ones provided in senior housing, but also looks at how you engage the community and younger people in an artistic point of activities that brings folks together around that. So are you seeing models or other things going on in terms of developing senior housing that's broader than the way we've traditionally thought of it?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. The first one from the US, there's a fantastic housing development near Boston, which not only provides the sort of housing that you may need in your older years, ranging from quite independent living through to very, very dependent living. And so there's a real continuity. You can move flexibly between those. But it's also in the same development incorporating things like childcare and involving the older people within that residential area in the childcare itself. And then, of course, through all of that, there are opportunities for that community to do any artistic endeavour they may want, and many of them learn things that they wish they'd done when they were younger. And finally, towards the end of life, they can learn to paint or to draw or whatever their aspiration. The other example is in China, and in Shanghai, for example, the city government is trying to establish, and I forget the population it requires, but it's something like for every 20,000 older people, and Shanghai is a very large city, so there's a lot of places. They try to create a centre where a community centre where those people can come. It's a place where they can, if they need, get food and medical attention. But one of the things that everyone I've ever visited, they have all sorts of opportunities for older people to participate musically. So they have orchestras, they have opera, because Chinese opera is really popular. They have calligraphy and painting classes. And this is a play, and they have ping pong. And I tell you, to see an 85-year-old Chinese ping pong player, there's no way I would challenge them. They'd thrash me. But these are places where these people have a really good quality of life and can do all sorts of things that other people also would like to do. And I think integrating that into the sense of community is really important. And then, of course, there are more public endeavours which you can also involve older people with.
Let's turn to a different kind of question, and this one's about is involving the political system. How critical is it to engage the political leaders in a community in this effort? And have you seen the examples of effective utilization of strategies to involve political leaders that have not traditionally been part of an aging focus?
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely crucial. We did a follow-up after our initial pilot on age-friendly cities, where we had these 33 cities come together. And when we followed them up a couple of years afterwards, only 6 were actually still involved in doing something. And the reason was that the people we'd engaged were university academics or people from NGOs who were passionate about this issue, but they came up against a glass ceiling that prevented any action. And so this is why what we require now is a commitment from the municipality. And the commitment, on the other hand, requires involving older people. So what we're trying to do is a top meets bottom approach, where you can generate the enthusiasm and the energy from the bottom, but you also need to create an environment that allows that to flourish, and that needs commitment from the top. I'll give you one more example from New York, because I think it's a real model for how this can be done. When the mayor decided that they were going to take this issue seriously, he called together each of his commissioners. And I was actually at the meeting. They had they've got about 20 commissions in New York that run the place. And essentially he said, I want all of you to look at what you do. I want you to think about what you aspire to, but also what you can do within your current budgets that's different. And I want you to think about this as a whole of government thing. So it's not just your territory, it's how you engage with the other commissioners on these issues. But they also created a series of consultative groups, not just with older people, but they created one with businesses. And it's evolved into a steering committee on age-friendly businesses. And on their website, if you look up age-friendly New York City, you'll find it. They've created guidelines for what it means to be an age-friendly business. And this was leadership, not just political leadership, but leadership from senior business members, which was really followed by many smaller businesses. And to me, that's some of the most inspiring leadership there is.
I think we have found similarly with the projects that we're involved with here that the political leadership is a critical component of all this. I do want to end up finally with one question having to do with the audience that we're just talking to today specifically, and that is organizations that actually fund programs in aging. So in terms of Grantmakers, how do you see Grantmakers involved in these activities, either locally or nationally or internationally?
Okay, let's start locally. I think that most of the responsibility for these actions needs to come from the municipality if we're talking at that level, because it's about, this is a core part of your constituency, and you need to meet their needs and govern appropriately. But a little bit of incentive money can go a long way, and I think there's things that can stimulate a community that otherwise might have neglected an issue to address it. So I think that sort of local investment can help, and it can either be direct investment or it can be through a competition, or if people want to participate, they can show what their plan is, and the best plans get some funding. It doesn't have to be a lot for those sorts of things, and it does seem to build enthusiasm. At a regional or a national level, I think it's about providing the support and coordination that those cities will then need, because one of the things we've experienced is you can have all the enthusiasm in the world, but unless you have, for example, And one guidebook isn't enough. You actually need access to other people. You need the opportunity to meet them and to share your experiences directly, to talk with them. You need perhaps the opportunity to visit other places. So there's all sorts of things which can be done at a regional level and a national level. And I know there's a few initiatives starting up in the US, and I'd really encourage some of your the foundations to consider those. At an international level, I think there's massive needs. One of the first things we've had to do is our guide was very much on assessing age friendliness. The reason we structured our program as it is to try and move more to a focus on implementation, to actually making a difference. Because it's one thing to say, well, these are the problems, but the challenge is to come up with the solutions. We don't even know what's going on out there. It's almost impossible for us to build a compendium of best practice and to give people access to that. We want to build some similar guidelines on implementation. So there's those core supports which I think are needed. And also, we want to move this movement to the poor world. We want to work in places in South America and in Africa and in India and parts of Southeast Asia, where millions and millions of older people live in absolutely terrible conditions, and where just thinking about things a little bit differently can make a very big difference to their lives. I can't even tell you how it will make a difference. We need to take those first steps. I suggested this once to an American, and I called the concept age-friendly slums. And I know in the US, slums has a different connotation than it does in some parts of the world. But I think people get what I'm talking about when I say that. How do we look at the needs of the millions of older people in some of these very peripheral communities with very limited resources and make that a more tolerable life and one where they can continue to contribute and participate? I think that's one of the great challenges, and I'd hope maybe one of your foundations would like to take it up.
I think those are all wonderful examples of the way in which foundation funding can be helpful. We're too close to the end of our time, but I do want to ask if you have any final thoughts to share with the audience.
No, I think one of the things that has really surprised me is just how rapidly this movement has grown. I mean, this was just an idea, but it's an idea that really people seem to get. And I think one of the things I've always found is when I talk to people, they say, yes, aging, it's a real challenge, but what can we do about it? And I think this whole movement of age-friendly environments is something very concrete that people can get. Yes, we can make a difference. We can do things differently and directly impact on the lives of older people. And so, I hope that your listeners hear our passion, but it's a passion that's shared by communities all around the world, and it's been a real thrill to be involved in this program, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next.
Well, I want to thank Dr. John Beard of the World Health Organization for joining us today. Thank you, John, for everything you do to make life better for older adults all around the world. And I also want to thank go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's a pleasure, John.
And I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation for their support of this program, as well as the American Society on Aging for their technical expertise. This is our last GIA webinar for this year, but be sure to watch your email for announcements for our series in 2013. And finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Have a happy holiday and great new year.